This series of teleclasses illustrating basic concepts of psychiatric nursing is presented by Video Nursing Incorporated of Evanston, Illinois. Instructor for the course is Martha Mitchell, nursing educator at the Illinois State Psychiatric Institute.
Today, in discussing the one-to-one nurse-patient relationship, we will explore the role of the nurse as a counselor. I am pleased to introduce as our guest a very distinguished nursing educator and author, one who has contributed a great deal to our understanding of the nurse-patient relationship. She is currently professor in nursing and director of the graduate program in advanced psychiatric nursing at Rutgers University. Dr. Peplow, perhaps we could begin today by clarifying what we mean when we speak of the role of the nurse as a counselor and its significance for nurses who are working with psychiatric patients.
Well, as you know, the work role of the nurse has been changing and expanding over the past several generations. It started out pretty much with a mother surrogate type role, which means that the nurse did a lot of bathing and feeding and toileting and dressing and disciplining and warning and so on. And then we took on a technical role, meaning that we took on some of the procedures which doctors used to do, like taking blood pressures and so on. And then third, we had a manager role in terms of managing the environment from a housekeeping standpoint. And then after World War I, we took on a health teaching role, and then a socializing role, and finally now we're beginning to develop a counseling role. In other words, if you look at the development in nursing, it's been moving from some of these more concrete work roles to a much more abstract set of roles like health teaching, managing the interpersonal environment, and counseling. Now, counseling also runs the gamut from a kind of brief, on-the-spot exchange between a nurse and a patient, a one-time kind of thing, all the way to psychotherapy that might go on for 200 or 300 hours for nurses who hold master's or doctoral degrees and have had education along those lines. But the American Nurses Association has just come out with a statement on psychiatric nursing, and in it, it formulated the trend which has been developing, that nurses ought to know how to do counseling, and they ought to be able to do it with any patient who needs it. And I would add that any graduate of any school of nursing ought to be able to carry a patient for 30 hours of counseling.
I wonder, are there certain phases which you could describe to this relationship? And then perhaps after we hear what these are, we could see an illustrative example of a patient who comes to the hospital and with whom you would be working, so you could demonstrate to us. But first, could we hear a description of the phases of a relationship?
Well, I think in briefest form, you could say that there is a phase of orientation, the nurse and the patient being pretty much a stranger to each other, and the counseling procedure being strange to the patient, so that they have to get oriented to each other, and the patient has to get oriented to the counseling procedure as the nurse is going to use it. And then a second phase you might call a phase of working relationship, in which the patient is clued in and does know what the work entails and how to proceed with it. And then a third phase you might call termination, in which the relationship for one reason or another is brought to an end, either because the patient is going home or the number of sessions that have been determined in advance have been ended, or, you know, for whatever other reason, patients sometimes decide they want to quit. Although that's rather rare, it is a termination. The merit of looking at counseling in terms of three phases is that then you can talk about it theoretically in terms of what you do in one phase or another phase, and how these are alike or different, and what different requirements you have in each phase.
But in general, you could say then that the 3 phases are determined for discussion purposes, but that they do overlap and that there are characteristics of each phase.
Right, they do. One merges into the other. And you might have a patient in the terminal session, in the very last session, asking for some orienting information that he has not fully clarified up until then. So there is an overlap of all the phases. But in order to talk about them and to see some orderly progression in the counseling relationship between a nurse and a patient, I think it's useful to think in terms of phases. The one thing about the one-to-one relationship, and especially in terms of counseling, is that it is a one-way focus on the patient, not on the nurse, but rather on the patient. The nurse bringing to it her theory and a procedure, that is a professional service that she makes available to the patient, and if he uses that service to the fullest, then he will be able to hopefully benefit from it.
I think that's a point that's important to bring out, how the focus is on the patient and how the nurse uses her knowledge and skills to understand the patient better. Let us look now at a situation in which Dr. Peplau demonstrates to us an initial encounter between herself and a patient.
Miss Hall? Are you Miss Hall?
Yes.
I'm Miss Peplau. I'm one of the nurses on the staff here. Dr. Jones asked if I would come over and spend some time talking with you.
Mm-hmm.
He thought that you might find that useful.
I doubt it.
Well, I do have some time, and I could see you on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 until 10 in the morning for a period of 5 weeks.
I really don't think it'll be necessary. I've been having difficulty sleeping, and I'm sure it's not what they think it is. They seem to think it's some sort of mental problem that's doing it. I'm positive that there's something physical that's bothering me, and they haven't taken me through tests, and I just would like some medication to sleep and to find out what it is that's wrong with me. I mean, it's not my head.
When did it start?
It started about a month ago.
Talk about that.
Well, I just have trouble sleeping. I used to be okay on that, and then I started first waking up in the middle of the night at 5 o'clock, you know, in the morning and stuff like that. And I'd walk around, and I was kind of, I just couldn't sleep, and then it started to get a little worse. I would wake up earlier, or then it started to happen before I fell asleep.
Well, this is the kind of thing that Dr. Jones thought it would be useful for you to talk about. And I could offer you 2-hour sessions each week for a period of 5 weeks so that you could take a look at this, at when it started, what went on when you were not sleeping, things of that kind.
Well,
I would be talking with Dr. Jones from time to time to review with him some of the notes. I would take a few notes, and I would review these notes with him from time to time, but otherwise you and I would have a confidential discussion about the situation the way it looks to you.
All right. I mean, it's worth trying. I don't know if you've ever not been able to sleep. But it's sort of scary. I don't know what's wrong. I think it's physical, and I don't think it's mental. I'd be willing to sit here and talk. I mean, I think I'm wasting your time, but I'd be willing to do it. It's probably what my parents want. And, you know, okay, if everybody thinks that's right, I'll do it for a while.
What do your parents have to do with it?
Well, it's their money, you know. I'm not self-supporting, so I'm pretty much responsible to what they think is best.
Well, how old are you?
I'm 20.
20. Tell me something about yourself.
What? I'm American. I'm Jewish. I'm a girl. I mean, what kind of thing do you want to know?
Whatever you are eager to talk about or want to talk about.
Well, I was born in the East, and my family moved several times. We lived in different places, and now I go to the University of Illinois. Up until last semester, well, this is my first semester there. Before that, I went to University of Missouri, and I really don't know what you want me to talk about.
Are you anxious right now?
Yes.
Are you? What do you do?
Well, I'm tired, you know, and I don't feel well. And my not feeling well has made me not able to sleep, and it gets on your nerves after a while. You know, you pace around and you smoke cigarettes, and I leave sometimes, you know. I find myself having a cup of coffee at midnight in a restaurant alone. I don't know. I just would like to find out what physically is wrong with me and get it taken care of, or get stronger medication so I can sleep.
The first time that you had this difficulty, talk about that night.
I woke up about 5 o'clock in the morning, and
Now, where were you?
at my parents' house.
Go on.
And I thought, I don't usually wake up in the middle of the night. I thought, I just had to go to the bathroom or something. So I did, and then I got back into bed. I didn't have to wake up. It was a Saturday. And I couldn't fall asleep. I didn't think much of it,
Actually, I don't know. I'm asking you to tell me. Now, what time was it when you woke up?
I guess it was around 5 o'clock. I don't know. My parents have a clock, and it rings.
And then what did you do first?
Well, I tried to go back to sleep, and I couldn't. And then, I tried these little things that you hear about, counting sheep, silly things like that. And they didn't work. So I turned the light on, and I started to read, and did that for a while, and then the whole thing wouldn't have seemed very important to me if I hadn't done the same thing the next night, only I woke up a little earlier. And so, little by little, it's just gotten worse. And it doesn't matter when I go to sleep, when I go to bed. Sometimes I try to stay up until I get very tired.
No, I don't know. Tell me about it.
Like if I have an 8 o'clock class or something, and I'm there, and I'm busy a lot during the day, and I do a lot of things that would normally make a person tired by at least midnight. And I push myself till after that, till I think, okay, now I'm just going to conk out when I get into bed. And then I turn off the light, and I don't conk out.
What do you do?
I turn a lot. I try different things, whether reading or, I don't know, my mother says hot milk, but, mothers. I'm nervous right now, mostly because I'm tired. And because I don't really like the connotation of being here.
Talk about being here, about coming here.
It's a farce. you know, I'm a perfectly, well, mentally sound individual. You know, I've had my psych courses, and I know where it's at. And I think when somebody has a physiological problem, it ought to be diagnosed as that, and it ought to be treated as that. And it shouldn't fool around and waste time and waste school time and, you know, put me back a semester and get me... I really just feel insulted.
Whose idea was it for you to come to the hospital?
My parents.
What were you told?
I was told that the doctor seemed to think that my insomnia was caused by an anxiety, and that it would be treated as that, and that I should be put here until... Well, I guess they were sort of worried about me. I don't know. I haven't... Some nights I'd go out when I couldn't sleep, and they have no idea where I went or what I did.
Now talk about one night that you did go out. Where did you go?
Out.
Where?
Well, I told you I went and had a cup of coffee. And my parents don't particularly trust me. So...
Illustrate that for me. Tell me about one time that you felt that you were being mistrusted by your parents. Give an illustration.
Well, that was an illustration.
Give another one.
I don't know. They just don't trust me. They all right, like in high school, you know, when they always gave me hours that I had to come home. They were usually stricter than the other kids because they I don't know what they thought I was going to do. And if they trusted me, they would have given me some freedom, but they didn't, because they don't.
It's almost time now for the end of the first interview. And I want to say again that I will be taking a few notes, and I would be going over these with Dr. Jones from time to time.
And I'd like to say again that you're wasting your time.
And I will come back on Thursday at 9 o'clock, and the discussion will occur here in the same place. And in the meantime, you could think about some things that you would like to talk about. It's your time. You ought to use it to your advantage.
Okay.
And I think one thing that might be very useful would be if you did think about times when your parents mistrusted you. This would be worth talking about.
Okay.
Is there anything you would like to ask about the interview sessions, the 10 sessions that I'm offering you?
My parents probably want to know what they cost.
Well, your parents would have to take that up with the hospital. That's not my concern.
You said you talked to Dr. Jones about this?
Yes, he thought that you might
Is that as far as
profit from having a chance to discuss your difficulties with a member of the professional staff, and I had the time, so I came and asked you about it.
But that's as far as anything I say here will go.
Yes, Dr. Jones and I will talk about these sessions, but other than that, it will not be discussed with your parents. I will not be going over the notes with the staff, the nurses and the attendants on the ward, but I will be discussing it with Dr. Jones, yes. Is this a concern of yours?
Yeah.
Well, I've told you the rules that I will use.
Okay.
Dr. Petlow, perhaps we could begin by your describing some of the main points to be associated with the orientation phase.
Well, the ones that I tried to illustrate in the material that you've just seen are these. The names of the participants ought to be clearly known. That is, the nurse needs to identify herself by name so that the patient knows, and call the patient by name. And the purpose of the sessions needs to be clearly stated. The time of the sessions, which includes the frequency, the duration, and the termination date, ought to be stated in the very first encounter. You'll notice that I didn't mention the termination date. That was an oversight on my part. But I did indicate to the patient that there would be 10 one-hour sessions. If notes are going to be taken, you need to tell the patient about the note-taking and also about confidentiality. That is, who else will share in the data. In this instance, the patient was told that her physician would have access to the data that was shared with me by the patient. If I was going to discuss it with the staff, the nurses, or the attendants, then the patient would be told that at the outset. And then, too, there ought to be some indication of the place of the interview. Now, the importance of this orienting information is, first of all, the patient has a right to be oriented to what kind of a service are you offering. And that's just as true if you're giving an enema or if you're offering a counseling process. And then I think, secondly, the regularity of the dependability of certain aspects of the counseling are really inherent in these features, that the same purpose is adhered to, that it's the same nurse, it's the same place, it's the same time, it's the same length. The regularity of the sessions, then, come to be something that the patient expects and counts on. And within that framework or those boundaries, the patient can then determine whatever content the patient wants to talk about, whatever is most problematic.
When he has trust of the structure and the individual with whom he's dealing.
Well, he can test the structure. He can check to see, will you stay 10 minutes later, or will you come late? Or he can test, will you hold to the purpose? Or can he change places and will you just follow him around? He can use all kinds of testing to see with what regularity or what are the boundaries of this situation. And out of that, I think, does come trust, that the person providing the counseling says what they mean. When you say you will be there at 9 o'clock, you come on the button and you leave at 10. And you don't arrive at 10 after 9 and leave at 10 after 10. And out of that, I think the patient does develop trust from these firm boundaries.
It was very interesting to see you clarifying again the terms of the relationship and what you intended to offer. I felt, too, a point well taken, which I hope was noticed, was how you didn't respond directly to the patient's repeated statements about how she didn't know if this would help. I wonder if you could comment to that.
Now, I think you have to be very careful in the first interview that you present yourself as being serious, that this is serious business and it's work, and that you're competent and that you know what you're doing. And then, by the same token, you don't get caught up in or sidetracked by these strategies that the patient might use to get you to be defensive or to, more or less present your wares in a seductive way rather than in a professional way.
I think that this gives us a good basis for progressing now to the working phase of the nurse-patient relationship.
What's on your agenda for this session? What are you thinking about now?
I have to. All right. You remember I told you last time that we moved when I was 7?
Yes.
Well, I started a new school. I guess it was second grade. And, you know, we moved from Maine to Philadelphia, and the accent was different there. I don't know whether I'm just blaming it on that, but I was strange, you know. And nobody liked me.
Give an example of that.
Well, they kind of made fun of the way I talked.
Who? Tell about one time this happened.
Well, there was a girl named Louise Luckenbach. And she was very popular. And she didn't like me. And so I said the word park. And she made fun of it because it was park to her. And I did something. About the first month after we were there, I started to pretend not.
Go on.
I started to pretend to be sick. And I pretended I had a stomach ache. And when they took my temperature, I'd hold the thermometer up to the light bulb so it would look high. And sometimes I'd cough till my throat got sore. And they didn't know what was wrong with me.
Who didn't know?
My parents and the doctor. And so they put me in the hospital for tests to see what was wrong and why my stomach was hurting. And I was there for 2 weeks. And they didn't find anything. Because I was faking. I mean, how can I expect my parents to trust me, huh? And it looks like even not being able to sleep wasn't real. And I really thought it was real. And I really wanted it to be real. You know?
No, I don't know. I'm trying to understand. Tell it in detail.
Well, I wasn't sick that time. I only told them I was sick. I only pretended I was sick, and they believed I was sick, and they went to so much expense, and so many tests that they did. X-rays of my stomach, and because I was lying.
But what does that have to do with not sleeping?
I just transferred colleges. And they didn't like me.
Who didn't like you?
The girls in the dorm. I tried to pledge a sorority. And I didn't get accepted. I had to do something.
What did you do?
I took diet pills.
Give the details about that.
Went to a doctor that I knew. I called him. And I said, you know, I was away at school and that I had a prescription for a certain diet pill that my doctor at home had given me what he called the pharmacy and refill it, and he did, and I got the prescription that way, and then I started to take pills at night so I'd stay up, so I'd get sick. And that's what happened.
What do you feel right now, talking about it?
A little relief. And a lot of disgust.
About what?
What a stupid thing to do.
Dr. Peplar, how does a nurse know, how is she able to judge when she has entered into the working phase of a relationship?
Well, there aren't any substantial criteria published yet in the literature, but I think there are some observable cues that are worth noticing. One of these is that the patient begins to take a focus. Instead of talking about 99 different things, the patient now begins to focus down on one or two specific instances of difficulty and will spend the entire hour on one or two of these. And then secondly, the patient will dress differently. And I might add either better or worse. If the patient looks better, of course the staff is pleased. But as Dr. Frum-Reichman pointed out, sometimes the patient looks worse. And this is a relaxation of certain controls, and it really is an improvement in the patient.
You don't address yourself, though, to that.
No, I wouldn't mention that. Also, the patient begins to connect sessions. Like the patient will say, last time I told you, so that you can see that the patient is connecting last time and this time. The patient also is much more aware of the therapist's presence or procedure and may even comment on it. And I think another critical criterion is the fact that the patient begins to recognize his own anxiety and can name it and say something about the situation that provokes it. So these are some of the ways that you can tell relationship, but it's quite different from orientation because there is more intimacy, more closeness, more shared focus on the work that is at hand.
I noticed with this particular patient, she repeatedly used phrases like, you know, and unclear words like theys, and that you would, on the one hand, not confirm that you did know when you didn't, and tried to clarify her reference. To whom was she referring when she said they? I wonder if you could speak to this point.
Yes, well, she had a recurring pattern there of saying you know, and then the other piece of it was I don't know, so that it was as though she was assigning to someone else the matter of knowing and presenting herself as a not knowing person. Although that didn't come out clearly in the sessions, I would make a guess along that line. Part of the work that you do is to pick up the unclear statements that the patient makes and ask about them, so that if the patient says they weren't treating me properly or they didn't trust me, you need to know who the patient is talking about, because in the first place, in a working relationship, you don't deal in hearsay, but rather in actual data experienced by the patient. And then secondly, when you clarify the language of the patient, you also clarify her thought, so that if she's talking about they, she would move in a direction of becoming more and more vague. Whereas if she can begin to say, my mother and father didn't trust me, she's getting closer to the truth of her own life experience. So you do need to pick those up, although I think it was illustrated that to ask once doesn't solve the problem. You have to keep after it.
That's true.
And say, no, I don't know, tell me. No, I don't know, or what is it I'm supposed to know? And hopefully, eventually, the patient will say, you know, no, you don't know, let me tell you, which, of course, didn't occur because in this instance, there were only 10 sessions, which is really a very short time.
It is. I wonder, do you find often that the patient challenges you when you respond with these kinds of suggestions that she or he clarify what they're talking about? For example, if the patient gets angry as to, of course you understand, or why don't you understand, to put you on more in the defensive or an attempt to do that.
Yes, but in this instance, you see, if I accept the notion, when the patient says you know, and if I accept that, I put myself in the position of being a mind reader, that I do know something about her that she hasn't told me, makes me a mind reader of some sort. And that's the way in which both of us can get a good deal sicker, and I'm not about to do that. Furthermore, I think that the whole point of counseling is to take what the patient says, ask about it, get it illustrated, get it clarified, get it described fully, so that you can help the patient to develop a number of very important competencies that are needed for problem solving, one of which is to talk about real people instead of pronouns.
Let us see now the final phase, the termination phase, in this relationship, as Dr. Peplow speaks for the last time with this patient.
Miss Hall, as you know, this is our last session. You and I have been talking for 9 hours up until now, and you've talked about a great many of the difficulties that have gotten in the way for you. And I think it'd be very useful to use this hour to summarize what has gotten talked about and what you have gotten out of these sessions, to more or less pull it together in an orderly way.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I'm sleeping now.
Oh?
You know, without my lack of sleeping wasn't just pharmaceutically induced. You know, I would lie there thinking about when I was a kid and when I wasn't accepted. And I think that incident that I told you about a few sessions ago of faking an illness had a great deal of effect on me, caused this incident to occur in great part. I think it was a causal factor. And another thing I think I've learned is that it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't accepted, but the way I responded to not being accepted or being accepted, just the way I responded to that tense situation so extremely.
Say a little more about that.
Well, I kind of have the feeling now that my mother was a little cold, or I realized that. And in fact, the first session I was a little afraid of you because you reminded me of her in that way, but you're a lot warmer than she is.
Oh, really? You haven't talked about this before.
Well, I think it's true. That's why I've been able to open up to you, and I never could talk to her.
Is it still true that I'm cold?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, you know, the first time I thought you were.
Oh, you saw it this way.
Then, as I relaxed, and I think it was me, I could open up to you, which did me a lot of good.
In what way?
Well, this was the first time I ever verbalized these things. And I ever got them together in front of my eyes in one piece, you know. The fact that being accepted is so important to me, and that this may come in part from having parents that I always felt a little insecure with, not quite sure of their love. And so I sort of overreacted to difficult situations, such as being in a new school or moving to a new community. And part of the reason I didn't sleep I wanted to be sick to get out of that tense situation. And also, I couldn't sleep because that new situation was so similar to the old one, to the one that I felt so guilty about, having lied when I was little.
So that actually the not sleeping wasn't the problem.
No, it seems more like a symptom than a cause.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel a lot better.
What are you going to do now?
Go back to school. I hope I can make up the work that I missed, and I won't have to lose this semester. My boyfriend even thinks I look better.
He said this?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel a lot better. Besides, not sleeping made me feel kind of sick.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel a lot more peaceful.
And you agree with your boyfriend, too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was one other thing that I noticed, too, and that is that you have, in these sessions, been able to name the fact that you were anxious and to talk about some of the ways that you went about trying to relieve it, like using illness, which you called faking illness, but really you were using it to relieve your own anxiety. Well, would there be any other things that you would want to say in summarizing what happened in these sessions?
I'd like to say thank you. And beyond that, I think I kind of got a new perspective on the connotation of mental health, having been there myself.
Well, you used the time very well, I would say.
Thank you.
And to your own advantage, and that's what therapy is about.
Today, we have attempted to discuss the counselor role of the nurse and to describe the 3 phases in the nurse-patient relationship: the orientation phase, the working phase, and the termination phase. We were pleased and honored to have today Dr. Peplow to help us in this task and to demonstrate herself, her skills, her knowledge in helping this patient.
This project was supported by project grant number NPG 114-03 under the Nurse Training Act of 1964, Division of Nursing, Public Health Service, U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare.